And second picture you will have seen around the globe.
To other people. Higher education model going to follow what the Australian model.
Raise your hand for those in the room and are questioning higher education. Are you finding people questioning the value of what you're doing? Are you finding people? It's interesting that some
will be recognized with the South African certification scholar. Once it goes to that, then they will venture.
All other priorities, I would say, achieve customer service.
My name is Noam Chomsky. We have Professor Chomsky with us. Welcome, Professor Chomsky, and happy birthday. You look as young as ever. I bow to the world delegation of scholars gathered today in the island nation of Mauritius. And I salute each of you watching us from around the world. I don't have a speech today, but it's a historic moment. And you are creating that history. In this session, we have award winners announced shortly, followed by a few welcome speeches, then a musical expression by Professor Keith Wright. Then we'll hear from Professor Chomsky, and we will end by singing happy birthday to our thought leader who is celebrating his 94th birthday. As you can imagine, you have been experiencing, our theme is very appropriate as we witness the world move at an extremely high speed, charting the way to the development of a technologically advanced society powered by a knowledge economy. As we do so, we must do it with compassion and wisdom to avoid, slow down, or stop impending catastrophes propelled by the unbridled forces of neoliberalism. So in our society right now, there is tension, and the pressure is evident in the way knowledge is weaponized. We wield power to dominate others as nations strive to be the number one. So in our quest, we need to remember more significant and critical goals that we need to achieve collectively. You will hear more from Professor Chomsky in this regard, but it is imperative if we hope to sustain our existence in this universe. Everyone knows knowledge is power, and if left unconstrained, it destroys. Managed, it contributes to the greater good of our society. In this context, we need a commanding voice that can foresee what is here and is loud enough to slow down our races to be number one. It needs to have earned the authority to warn us of the consequences of the competitive stupidity we are often enamored by. The voice that dares to speak truth to power. A voice that encourages collaboration over competition. Such is the idea behind these Global Connections Awards. Now you know why these awards are named after no other than Professor Noam Chomsky. He is our voice. As he has stated once, we are at a moment where human beings have to determine whether they have the moral and intellectual capacity to join together, to cooperate, to overcome existential problems that are global in character. As you are aware, the Star Scholars Network is a global grassroots movement shaping the future of humanity. In a network, no one is at the top, no one is at the bottom. A network is a network because we're connected. Everyone is interested in hearing what Professor Chomsky has to say because he's not only one of the most cited scholars in the world, but also because he is revered as one of the most intelligent human beings of all time. And I must add, sometimes controversial for apparent reasons. And what he says is not only insightful, but also shocking and at sometimes somber. He once reflected, we have little bits of understanding, glimpses, a little bit of light here and there, but there is a tremendous amount of darkness, which is a challenge. So at this historic juncture, accentuated by COVID-19, we at the Star Scholars Network know global connections is the only hope for the future of humanity. Global connections are what we celebrate. Global connections are why we organize. Global connections power our research and advocacy for new generations of international scholars and graduate students working across borders. Hence, today, we link arms in solidarity. Tomorrow, we rise to continue to work. Together, we will shape a more humane world. That is why every year this time, we recognize and celebrate the leaders who have taken actions to shape a more humane world. Thank you.
Congratulations to the 2022 Noam Chomsky Global Connections Awards winners. Lifetime Achievement Awards recipients, Betty Leese, Lynn Pasquarella, and Helen Forbes Muir. Humanitarian Awards recipients, Aya Chevy, Jamie Lachman, and the Unforgotten. Achievement in Research Awards recipients, Adesoji Diallo Oni, Birgit Schreiber, and the Journal of English as an International Language. Emerging Scholars Certificate recipients, Nasef Manabaling Adion, Jean Lenny Stinkoe, Roger W. Anderson. Congratulations to all of the 2022 Noam Chomsky Global Connections Awards winners.
Start by extending my congratulations to all of the award winners. It's a pleasure, privilege to be able to participate in it. The record of accomplishment of the winners of the awards in past years and today is an inspiration and a foretaste of achievements to come that will greatly enrich the society that is coming into being. It's a truly exciting prospect. There are, however, some questions looming, questions which cannot be put aside. What kind of society will emerge in the days to come? And at a deeper level, do humans have the moral capacity to deal with threats of a kind that have never arisen in the brief sojourn of humans on Earth? I stress moral capacity. There's good reasons to believe that humans have the technical capacity to deal with the threats effectively. We know what should be done and is feasible, but we then face a more fundamental question. There is a great gap, even a chasm, between our technical capacity to destroy and our moral capacity to control this impulse. Can it be overcome? Well, that question has arisen throughout human history. It arises today, but in a new form. The capacity to destroy has reached such heights of organized human society is at stake, not in the distant future. The question, from the grim gap, therefore becomes the ultimate question. A negative answer will mean that there are no further questions that matter. Well, let's reflect a little on these ominous questions. Humans are a recent arrival on Earth, few 100,000 years. It's an eye blink in evolutionary time. They are a singular creature with fundamental characteristics that are unique, most striking, the capacities for language and thought, closely interlinked, if not identical. These capacities yield the ability to pose questions, sometimes to answer them. Of course, of the organic world. These questions vary in significance one stands alone. Will humans decide to carry forward the human experiment, or will they choose to bring a glorious end? It's the ultimate question. The question was posed with dramatic clarity 77 years ago with the atomic bombings. These events and the reaction to them revealed that there was an enormous gap between our technical capacity to destroy and our moral capacity to control this impulse. The question posed then is whether this gap is unbridgeable. If it is, it's a question of such significance that humans will pose. The question was raised by the distinguished Enrico Fermi a few years after the atomic bombing. Put simply, the question was, where are they? Fermi recognized that in the accessible universe, there are innumerable planets that should be able to sustain intelligent life that is advanced enough to have contacted Earth, but no trace of them had been found. Fermi's paradox, as it's been called, 70 years later, after total failure of very extensive efforts to find some indication of intelligent life, the paradox has greatly deepened. Well, various answers to the box have been proposed. One story has it that the great mathematician John von Neumann responded at once by saying that any advanced civilization would have developed nuclear energy, destroyed itself, uncontrolled radiation. Worth some thought. Another idea that there's an inherent property of higher intelligence, which creates a gap between the technological capacity to destroy and the moral capacity to control the impulse, a gap that's unbridgeable. Hence, if higher intelligence appeared somewhere, didn't take long to destroy itself. The existence of the gap is quite evident. We're now engaged in an experiment to answer the question whether the gap is unbridgeable. If we give the wrong answer, we're doomed. Perhaps not tomorrow, distant future, and the decline from irreversible tipping points in climate will be so grim that few would want even to endure the experience. I'm, of course, referring to the two primary threats to the survival of organized human life on Earth, not to speak of the many other species that we are wantonly destroying in our madness. The two threats, of course, are nuclear war and global warming. Well, current commentary has so descended in quality that it is now treating nuclear war as an option to be considered, and policies are being pursued that make it more likely. I'll come to that. But let's keep first to heating the earth and our reaction to it. It's begun with the center of production of the poisons that threaten survival, the Middle East region. Recent studies have found that earlier affects earlier estimates of the of global heat Eastern Mediterranean had badly underestimated the impact. New research shows that by the end of the century, average temperatures in the Eastern Mediterranean will have risen 5 degrees Celsius, and the sea level will be 2 to 2.5 meters higher than today. Well, I leave the rest to your imagination. The next question is, how are the potential victims reacting to these strident warnings from their own top scientists and the international scientific community? The answer is they're reacting by ignoring them, talking about the area, the region of the world, which is the global center for fossil production, and pointed out that it is unlike under current trends, it's unlikely to survive even to the end of the century. And the reaction is to fight over who can produce more fossil fuels. Well, nearby, a conflict is brewing in Cyprus, might explode into a war. And concerns about who will lead the way in destroying the environment that's life by the fossil fuel resources of the Eastern Mediterranean, supervising pipelines to accelerate. Will Greece or Turkey have the honor to NATO powers, powerful, would explode into terminal war? Well, move a little further away. India are devoting scarce resources to a likely war that will destroy both of them. One source of conflict is the melting of the glaciers, Himalayan glaciers, that serve as major water sources for both. Meanwhile, a third of Pakistan has been under several meters of water from unprecedented monsoons, while in nearby North India, poor peasants are trying to survive temperatures reaching almost to 50 degrees Celsius. And this is, of course, not the ceiling, only the current stage of our folly. Well, I haven't mentioned those who will suffer the most, the island nations, which will not survive if current tendencies persist. Several weeks ago, the World Meteorological Organization released a study of the trajectory they're now pursuing. It reported, unsurprisingly, that last year greenhouse gas levels hit. Looking back, it reported that between 1990 and 2021, quoting it now, the warming effect on our climate by long-lived greenhouse gases rose by nearly 50%, carbon dioxide accounting for about 80% of this increase. The anticipated trajectory. There is also some good news. The International Energy Association recently written its message that the means to prevent catastrophe and to move on to a better world are available and are feasible if we can close the grim gap in time. The World Meteorological Organization review that I mentioned began with 1990, because that was the initiation of the process protocol, the first international treaty to control the plague. It was signed by two holdouts, Andorra and the United States. 1990 is significant in another respect. That's when the basic information about the dread consequences of global heating, long known in the scientific world, that's when they reached the general public. The critical event was widely publicized testimony on the coming catastrophe by the prominent earth scientist James Hansen. The corporate sector reacted at once. To them, Hansen's testimony was not. Their own scientists had been in the forefront in identifying and warning about the threat, but their work and warning had filed away as annoying company secrets. After Hansen's testimony in 1998, secrecy was no longer possible. The public relations specialists of the companies were called into action. They recommended that the companies should not deny the facts and be quickly refuted. Rather, they should say, maybe we have not yet understood the effect of sunspots or cloud cover. Let's be reasonable and wait. Meanwhile, growing our economies by rapid use of fossil fuels so that we'll be able to confront problems as a much richer society. While, of course, the companies are raking in huge profits. That worked well with the consequences just reviewed by the World Meteorological Organization. Intelligence tends to render the grim gap unbridgeable. Over the centuries, humans have constructed institutional structures which are designed to lead to species suicide in the interest of short-term gain for the masters. A new insight. 250 years ago, Adam Smith observed that those he called the masters of mankind, his day, that was the merchants and manufacturers of England. The masters, he said, are the principal architects of government policy and make sure that their own interests are most peculiarly attended to, no matter how grievous the effect on others. I'm quoting Smith, includes the people of England, though more so the victims of those he called the savage injustice of the Europeans abroad. In all ages, Smith warned, if they operate without public constraints, the masters will relentlessly pursue their vile max, all for ourselves, nothing for anyone else. That's the nature of the institutions. We're sure the trajectory outlined by the World Meteorological Organization continues. The United States is opening up vast new oil fields for exploration, along with others laying new pipelines. The euphoria in the fossil fuel industry headquarters is unconstrained, buoyed not only by stellar prospects for the march to the precipice, but also by profits beyond the dreams of avarice. A few weeks ago, ExxonMobil posted the highest profit in its 150-year history. as prices surged. Chevron, another major, also blew past estimates to post their second highest ever. Saudi Arabia enjoyed double those profits in the last quarter. Others among the masters are not lagging behind. Military production is skyrocketing. Few corporations that dominate food production are reporting record-breaking profits thanks to the hunger that's stalking the world. Pursuit of the vile maxim is relentless. Well, these institutions are one product of higher intelligence, taking diverse forms, all within the framework of the general state capitalism that has prevailed everywhere for the past century. There has progress in cutting their worst excesses, but in the past 40 years, serious regression. We even have some measures of the regression. In the United States, the leader of the pack, by virtue of its enormous power, in the United States, about $50 trillion has been transferred from the population to the pockets of the top 1% during the 40 years, or to unconstrained class war. $50 trillion is not a small achievement. Can this be reversed? In principle, yes. We know how, just as we know how the climate crisis can be contained by readily available measures that will make it possible to move on to a world. But knowing the answers is not enough. The grim question remains, can we bridge up between what we know how to do and our capacity to implement that knowledge for the common good? Well, let's turn to the second of the threats to survival, this one imminent, not lingering in mounting horror like the climate crisis. Second threat is nuclear war. It's with regard to nuclear war that the grim question of the unbridgeable gap was posed in stark terms in August 1945. That made it clear that human technical competence had risen to the level where it could destroy life on Earth. Not quite. The bombs were still too small, but it was clear that technology would move on to the capacity to destroy everything, as it did in 1952, when the United States and the Soviet Union exploded thermonuclear weapons. Can destroy everything. At that point, the hands of the famous doomsday clock were advanced to 2 minutes to midnight. Midnight meaning termination of the human experiment. The hands have oscillated since, varying with assessments of the global security situation. They did not reach 2 minutes again until President Trump's term in office. In his last year, the analysts abandoned minutes and moved to seconds, 100 seconds to midnight, where the hands now stand. They will be reset in late January, and they should be moved still closer to midnight. The nature of the threat is stated clearly in the official strategic posture of the United States. Under Trump, It was shifted from focus on terrorism to pure competition, the need to prevail in two nuclear wars with China and Russia. That might seem to be a fair definition of clinical insanity. A war with either would be the end, but we have since moved beyond. The Biden administration adopted this policy, but expanded it. Official policy is to, I'll quote, encircle China with a ring of sentinel states, heavily armed with precision weapons aimed at China, backed with major naval maneuvers in the Pacific region called. Threat has recently been extended by the decision to station nuclear-capable 52s in northern Australia. The US-run NATO alliance, in its recent summit a couple of weeks ago, expanded North Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific region, meaning that its reach is worldwide. The most crucial is Taiwan. Official policy set in the 1970s declares China with what is called strategic ambiguity. Neither China nor the United States this arrangement by force. That agreement has kept the peace for 50 years. National affairs. No longer. Neither side is blameless, but it is Washington that has recently been taking steps to undermine the fragile agreement. The encirclement policy are one example. Another is House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's reckless visit to Taiwan, to which China responded by demonstrating its capacity to blockade Taiwan. Shortly after, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee passed a bipartisan Taiwan Policy Act that declares Taiwan to be a non-NATO ally of the United States, calling for the same diplomatic status as any other country, along with enhanced flow of U.S. arms, integration with U.S. forces, with interoperability of weapons. It's a serious threat to the strategic ambiguity that has kept the peace. Biden then moved on with a virtual declaration of war. I'll quote the London Financial Times, the world's leading business press. Joe Biden this month launched a full-blown economic war on China, and all but committing the United States to stopping China's rise. History is likely toward this move as the moment when US-China rivalry came out of the closet, is now pledged to do everything short of fighting an actual war to stop China's rise. The US is now committed to blocking China in all kinds of civilian technologies that make up a modern economy. The New York Times editors affirmed their support of the policy. I'll quote them, described it as a new US policy of actively strangling large segments of the Chinese technology industry, strangling with an intent to kill. The regulations apply to any company in the world that is American semiconductor technology. So if a non-American chip manufacturer agrees to make Chinese-designed chips could lose access to American chip-making machines that it can't get anywhere else. Well, whatever anyone thinks of this wide range of strategic and economic policies, there is no doubt that they provide reasons to move the hands of the doomsday clock closer to midnight. I haven't mentioned the rising threat of nuclear war in Europe. It's extensively discussed, though with not sufficient urgency. Well, all that brings us back to the grim question and the obstacles to giving the answer that we must, if it is not to be the final question raised in this brief sojourn of humans on the earth. Suppose we're able to provide the desired answer to the question, no small achievement. What kind of global order can we expect to see? Right now, it's a highly contested question. The major current issue of global order is whether it will continue to be unipolar, dominated by the United States, or whether it will become a multipolar system with a number of centers of power. The role of Europe is central to these developments and debates for a long time. Throughout the Cold War, there have been conflicting visions of Europe's place in the global order. The Atlanticist vision, based on NATO, holds that Europe should be subordinate to the United States. Charles de Gaulle was the leading advocate of the view that Europe, in words, from the Atlantic to the Urals, encompassing Russia and Western Europe, should become an independent third force. Some support for his positions in Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik, other initiatives. As the Soviet Union collapsed, Mikhail Gorbachev proposed the idea of what he called a common European home, from Lisbon to Vladivostok, with no military alliances, common efforts to construct a social democratic future. The United States toyed briefly with similar ideas, but they were rejected by President Bill Clinton in favor of expansion of NATO to the Russian border, in violation of firm, unambiguous promises to Gorbachev when he agreed to unification of Germany within NATO, and against the advice of virtually everyone in the higher levels of US diplomacy who had any knowledge of Russia, beginning with George Kennan and many others. Putin's criminal invasion of Ukraine settled the matter, at least in the short run, by driving Europe into the hands of the United States, providing Washington with a most welcome gift. French President Emmanuel Macron is one of the few statesmen in today's world, tried until the last minute to convince President Putin to follow a different course, perhaps leading to something like Gorbachev's vision. Putin refused with contempt. Then came the invasion. But the matter is not ended. Europe is suffering severely from hanging on to Washington's coattails. Changes may be coming. Meanwhile, China is quietly expanding its huge loan and development program throughout Asia, reaching also to Africa, Middle East, Latin America, soon to Europe. The United States is trying hard. Global order is not confined to the great powers. The large majority of the world, the globe, also calls for a place at the table. Though this is marginalized in standard history, this has been true since decolonization began after World War II. Many initiatives have taken, among them the non-aligned movement. It's transmuted to what's called G77, now 130 countries. Other initiatives were the call for a new international economic and a new international information order, the establishment of UNCTAD within the UN system, with third world concerns. BRICS, largely a Brazilian initiative, might be revived under noted President Lula's leadership. These efforts were beaten back harshly by the United States and its allies, but they survive, and they are sure to find their place in the developing system of world order, if that is, a system of world order will develop at all. The grim question once again. Well, your future, to promise, can be bright, exciting, personally fulfilling, of great fit to the entire world, if we can manage to overcome the grim gap, a challenge that can't put to the side. Thank you. What kind of global order can we expect to see? Question. Question.
This is the evening of the first day conference. And the star leadership team are taking pictures here. The best experience here for sure.
Yep.
Guys, all right, we are heading to. Smile, cheers. All right. Don't forget that colorful building. Yeah. Let's go in. Good. Going to see the garden in a minute.